Hey everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of He's Not Wrong. I'm your host, Chad D. Before we get into the episode, we just have a few housekeeping rules. Number one, we have a lot of new listeners. We have a lot of people who are joining us from finding about He's Not Wrong on social media. If you find yourself in that camp, I need you to pause the episode right now, whether it be YouTube, whether it be Spotify, whether it be iHeartRadio, whether it be Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to me from right now in this moment, I need you to go ahead and leave me a review, leave us 5 stars, do the whole thing. It helps us tremendously. For maybe the past year, I've quit putting that call to action into the episodes, but we're at a moment of growth. We are at a moment where that's really important. The space is competitive, and we need the algorithm to, push us out to more people who need to hear the messages that we talk about on this podcast. And a way that we do that is by having you, the listener, leave us a review. So please, if you have a moment and you feel called to do so, leave us a review, leave us some stars. I would really appreciate that. Today's guest is returning for a second time, so he can now be referred to as a correspondent, because as you know, if you come on to He's Not Wrong podcast twice, you're now a correspondent of mine, and I can call you anytime for anything that I need as it relates to this podcast. So former United States Senator Doug Jones, who is the Democratic nominee for governor of Alabama, is joining us today. We talk about a lot, from data centers to healthcare to the youth vote. He answers a few audience submitted questions. We get into all of it. He won the primary for the Democratic nomination back on May 19th, and we unpacked a lot from that night as it relates to his campaign and Tommy Tuberville's. I'm not even going to continue on with this intro because I just want to go ahead and give you my episode with the one and only former United States Senator Doug Jones. Doug Jones, welcome back to He's Not Wrong. I appreciate you coming back on. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Chad. Thanks for having me again. Always great to see you.
Absolutely. I'm happy that you're here. Your first episode earlier this year, a lot of people listened to it and they're really excited that you were doing podcasts and Alabama-centered podcasts. So it's an honor to have you back on. But we have a lot to unpack, because when you came on in January, you announced about a month before that you're running for governor. And since then, you've won the primary. So what was that like, winning on May 19th?
May 19th was extraordinary. I mean, it was a rocking time. We worked really hard. We focused on the primary. I mean, I know a lot of people had thought, well, I need to be here, I need to be there, I need to be doing, but we really focused on getting votes out in the primary. We knew where Democratic Party votes, Democratic voters were by and large. But that night was really extraordinary. We saw a big win, and I so much appreciate any of your listeners, the folks out there that voted for me, help us get across the threshold with almost 80% of the vote, which was significantly better than what we did. We were hoping to win it without a runoff, but the margin there was just really extraordinary. But more importantly, I think what excited us so much was to see the number of ballots that were going out among Democrats. I mean, we did not have that many races statewide. We only had 4 statewide races and then a few local races. But the number of Democratic ballots in every county just about across the state was amazing. So it was a very, very exciting night. And I think it says a lot about where we're going with this campaign into the fall election.
I want to ask about those ballots real quickly, because I believe, as you said, Democrats saw somewhere in the 90% increase of ballots when compared to 2022's primaries. Republicans saw a 25% decrease when compared to 2022. What does that mean for your campaign when we look towards November?
Well, Chad, let me correct you a little bit. Democrats actually saw more than double the amount of ballots that went out from 2022. I mean, literally more than double. There were some counties in this state, like Shelby County, St. Clair County, that saw 2.5 times the number of ballots. And what was really interesting about that is that you did not see a lot of money spent in the Democratic primary. I spent a little money on radio, yard signs, a few other, some staff. You saw a few other candidates spending a little bit of money, but not a lot of money. I think the most money might have been spent in North Alabama with the congressional race and some local races up there. But that is as opposed to the other side that saw incredible amounts of money being spent, 12,
Yeah.
$15 million probably. And their ballots were down by 25%. And what that tells you is exactly what we talked about in January, that we felt all along, that people want a change. People are hurting out there. They're concerned about their gas prices. They're concerned about their groceries, their prices. They're concerned about their electricity bills. They're wanting that change out there that I think that they see with not only my race, but Phil Ensler and all
Yeah.
of the folks that we are running as this change ticket, the ticket for change there. So people came out, and I do think, look, I don't want to minimize the effect that the Calais decision, the voting rights decision had, and how our governor and state legislature just rammed down our throat new congressional
Yeah.
maps over the course of about 48 hours. So I think that has energized a lot of people as well.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to get into that Calais decision here in a little bit, but I want to tell you a story real quickly because something I'm really proud of. And as you know, I grew up in a Catholic military conservative family, and it wasn't until college when I became what I view now as a pretty liberal Democrat. When I started meeting people that looked different from me, talked different from me, had different experiences than I had, and I was able to really learn from my community, and that's shaped who I am today. And I always try to share my experience with the people from my community in Montgomery, Alabama, and I'm so happy that my parents, for the first time, voted Democrat in the May 19th primary for you, partly because of that their awareness with what's going on, their knowledge of how dangerous a Tommy Tuberville governorship would be. When you look at that election night on May 19th, and I know this was unplanned, but you compare the speeches of Tommy Tuberville with yourself, and it could not be more vastly different. It would like the choice to me is obvious when you hear the speech. You were speaking to unity, you were speaking to everyone, and Tommy Tuberville was speaking just to one side and probably just a sect of that
Right.
side.
Yeah.
So I would just like to hear your opinion about that.
Well, first of all, let me say I appreciate your parents crossing that line and making sure that they voted for me at that time. That means a lot. It really does. And we've seen that, I think, more and more. And I think that accounts in part for some of the increase in the ballots. I think there's an enthusiasm among traditional Democratic voters, but I also think there are a lot of folks that are independent or that have moved that way and now
Yeah.
voting their conscience. And you are absolutely right. The contrast could not be greater. I mean, Tuberville is a divisive figure. He relishes that. That night, and his floor statements on the
Yeah.
Senate floor are all about hate. They're about division. And that is so different than the Alabama that I grew up. It's so different than the Alabama that we want to be. We have talked before about how we see Alabama as that crowded table where
Yeah.
there's a place for everyone. And that's what I truly believe. And it's interesting, I think, as we go forward, more and more people like your parents are not only seeing the difference, they're moving away from the division, they're moving away from the hate, and they're not listening to people like Tuberville say, oh, Doug Jones is just some socialist, Marxist, globalist, godless person, the way he said that night. And they look at my record and they thought, no, well, wait a minute. This guy reached across the aisle.
Yeah.
He talked to Republicans. He's talking to me. He's talking to everybody in the state of Alabama, and he's listening to them and understanding the communities. It's a big difference. It's coming through loud and clear. And that's why we feel so good about where this race is right now and where it's going to be headed toward the fall.
I mean, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I almost appreciate Tommy Tuberville for how divisive he is because he makes my job so easy. Because when he says these things, I have all this footage from the events I go to with you, and I'm like, here's the proof. It goes directly against what Tommy's saying. Like the two don't align, and it's so easy to juxtapose the two. Um, but
It's
I do go ahead.
it is it's really because that's been his history.
Yeah.
Ever since he ran in 2020, that is history. And you know what, Chad? I think people are trying to move past the fear factor in elections. That is he's got nothing else except that. He's not running to try to help people.
Yeah.
He's not trying to run on affordability issues and trying to get people's costs down and get their wages up. He's not running on education. He's running on a fear factor that he believes will be successful. It's been successful in Alabama in the past, so he's counting on it being successful again. But
Yeah.
I really believe there's something different out there this year. People are not looking for that kind of fear. They really want people to work together. We all have our political differences, and that's okay. But people also understand that, I may disagree on a couple of these things, but we can find common ground on a few things. And if we can find it on a few things, we can find it on a few
Yeah.
things more. That's what I think the people of Alabama not only want, I think that's what they deserve.
Absolutely. I agree. And I want to give you an opportunity to respond to some of the news that came out yesterday, because I was covering the Tommy Tuberville residency challenge over the past few weeks. I was covering it a lot, and it garnered a lot of attention. And yesterday, after the decision came out that they're going to keep Tommy Tuberville as their candidate, despite the evidence and what it shows, Tommy Tuberville came out with a statement, and he said, in 2020, I ran against a liberal, Doug Jones, but he has since fallen deep into the socialist Marxist mind virus, taking over half of our country. That goes to the divisiveness that you're speaking to, but I want to give you an opportunity to directly respond to that statement, because it's so insane to me that is what he says after the challenge.
Chad, I don't even know what the hell he's talking about. I mean, if anybody looks at my history, they know better.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to make sure people do, to look and compare myself with Tuberville. And just look at my record, okay? Don't take his word for. I don't think he knows what those words mean. Actually, I really don't think he knows what a Marxist is or a socialist. He just
Yeah.
knows that it's bad, and so you got to use your names. And if that's the best you got nothing.
Mhm.
And there's no substance behind those remarks like that. And again, I'm inviting everybody. We're going to be out there a lot, to talk to people, to listen to people. And I'm inviting not just fellow Democrats, but anybody in the community to come out and listen. Challenge me on some of the things that I'm going to be
Yeah.
saying. That's what democracy is all about. But I'll tell you, Chad, the interesting piece of that statement was, I don't know what the mind virus is, and he's just making weird stuff up. I mean, but when he said that it's time that Doug Jones come out of his hole and start talking about policy, you know what? You know how I take that? I take that as a challenge to a debate. And so I am happy, coach. I am happy to meet you anytime to come out and let's debate our respective policy positions, because you got none. You've
Yeah.
got fear. And we have been going around talking to people all over this state about the utility crisis. We're talking about gas prices. We're talking about farmers and their problems. We're talking about education. We're talking about Medicaid expansion and the healthcare crisis. Those are real policies that we've been talking about. And so I took that and I posted something last night, and we're going to do something again today. I am absolutely taking that as a challenge to a debate, which I gladly accept and would love to see us going around the state in a series of debates about what's important to the people of Alabama.
And I will be there to cover it. I saw your post on Threads in your response to Tommy Tuberville, and I thought it was pitch perfect. It was spot on. One thing that I do want to ask you about, because it's an issue before we get into your policies and issues facing the state. One issue that I see is within the Democratic Party in Alabama. Within itself, there's a lot of infighting. There's a lot of disagreements amongst Democrats. And I think we saw that come to a head right before the primary. And since then, I haven't heard too much, but personally, it is my fear that people might not be motivated to go to the polls in November because one side hasn't endorsed the other side, and you just see all that playing out. So I just want you to also have the opportunity to speak to unifying the party and to speak to those individuals who might not have voted for you in the primary, but what is your message to them to also get out and vote for you in November?
Well, look, let's put this in the right context, okay?
Sure.
We heard that too. We heard about the divisive party, and we've seen that playing out in the past. But I think it was a lot less pronounced in the Democratic Party this year, and I think you see that from the results of the election. Not only did we have a huge turnout, two times more than in 2022, but I got it close to 80% of the vote. So there's always some division. That's what democracy is about. But I feel like at the end of the day, Democrats are rallying around a candidacy. They're rallying around a change because it's not just Doug Jones that's on that ballot. It's Phil Lenzler, and it's Ross Houston, and it's Jeff McLaughlin, and it's Violet Edwards, and it's Ron Sparks, and it's our PSC candidates, and we've got local candidates. But if there is any division these days, what's really interesting is that people have looked to the Democratic Party as being divisive, but you really didn't hear a lot of that during the primary, and it was bore out. But look at the divisions that we're seeing play
Yeah.
out in public in the Republican Party, where they're calling each other racist type names. They're calling people frauds. I mean, it is as ugly of races for Attorney General and
Yeah.
Secretary of State and the U.S. Senate as I have ever seen in the Republican Party. If there are any divisions, it is in the Republican Party.
Yeah.
It is not within the Democratic Party. We're going to gather around and we're building a campaign that is dependent on Doug Jones and the rest of our ticket for change. We're going to be working together. We're going to be coordinating together. And that's why I think that we're going to be successful in the fall.
I appreciate that context and that color you give that. One thing that I also appreciate about you is how from very early on with the fight over the Public Service Commission here in Alabama, you spoke to that and you spoke truth to it, and you were the only candidate for a while to be speaking about the Public Service Commission and the experiences that Alabamians are facing with their utility bills. So you're speaking to holding the Public Service Commission accountable, holding Alabama Power accountable, and our public utilities accountable. Whereas you have Tommy Tuberville, who floated the idea of having an energy secretary, and then look what we have now coming down the pipe. We
Yeah.
have the governor appointing an energy secretary, who will have control over the agenda of the Public Service Commission, and a person who's not elected. And so I just wanted to thank you for being at the forefront of that fight. It's not done, but it's just an issue that is unifying for all Alabamians, and you've been speaking about it this entire time.
Yeah, and I oppose that bill. I still oppose that
Yeah.
bill. I think it's a wrong-headed bill. But it is the law now, and and they rammed that through without a whole lot of thought, nothing that went into it. And so now I think the people have an even better, a more interesting choice. It is not just about they're going to elect to the PSC, but who are they going to elect as governor who's going to control that PSC?
Yeah.
Because we're going to make sure that utilities pay their fair share. They seek rate cases. They are challenged with those rate cases. We want every utility to make a fair return. We just don't want folks getting gouged. We don't
Yeah.
want deals
Yep.
being done in secret. We don't want rubber stamps. So, as much as I would like to see, and will candidly, Chad, work to change that law back to where it is in the hands of voters, for the time being, the choice is who do you want looking out again for your electricity bill? Is it somebody like Tommy Tuberville and his appointee? Do you really think he's going to protect your interest? Or do you want somebody like Doug Jones, who's not only going to protect your interest, but is going to work to put it back in your hands?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to pivot really quickly to what you mentioned earlier with the Callais decision that came down from the Supreme Court. It's a confusing topic. it is hard to really wrap your mind around the gravity of what the Supreme Court did when they gutted the Voting Rights Act in that decision. You've been talking about it since the day that the filing came down. And so it is something that I think can either motivate people to go to the polls or it can confuse them and they'll stay home. And I have seen both sides of it with my audience. And so I want to give you the opportunity to kind of explain the severity of that decision, what it means for Alabama, and what we need to be aware of as we go to the polls over the next few months. Because now there are we have a runoff tomorrow, then there's going to be a special election in August, and we vote again in November. It's confusing.
Yeah, it is confusing, it was, that's why we shouldn't even be in this position that it's so confusing. And it's not just confusing; it's going to put a burden on election officials in those districts. Because you're absolutely right. There's a runoff tomorrow, and people are trying to get folks out to vote in the U.S. Senate races on both sides of the aisle. There's some other races on the Republican side, but then the people in the first and second and fifth and sixth congressional districts have to go back to the polls because all of their votes, the legislature nullified every vote that was cast on May the 19th. Every one of them in those four districts. So we're going to have to go back to the polls if you live in those congressional districts, and also in a couple of state Senate districts, 25 and 26, where they did the same thing. So it is going to be confusing. But the bottom line is this. The bottom line is what the Supreme Court of the United States has done and when they ratified Alabama's new congressional districts, knowing the chaos that is going to be created, knowing that this was rammed down everybody's throats. The Voting Rights Act exists only on paper now. There is essentially no enforcement mechanism. After that decision out of Louisiana, the Callais decision, our cases went back to the 3-judge panel that heard it to begin with. They heard it. They heard all the evidence 3 years ago. And they ruled then that the state had intentionally discriminated on the basis of race with regard to drawing the congressional district lines. They revisited that in light of the Callais decision and the guidance from the Supreme Court and held the same way. But the Supreme Court said, forget that. Don't worry about it. Just let the state do what they want to do. So as a practical matter, folks, the Voting Rights Act does not exist anymore. It is on paper only, but has no real way to enforce it. Now, Chad, I want to kind of explain to folks something. I want to say it in a different way.
Sure.
The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965 after, and Alabama was ground zero. The states of the old Confederacy, including Alabama, were ground zero for the Voting Rights Act because African Americans in Alabama and the South had been so discriminated against. Poll taxes, literacy tests, gerrymandered districts to where they have no voice. They could not even have a chance of electing people that they wanted to represent them. The congressional delegation didn't look like Alabama. The state legislature didn't look like Alabama. City councils and county commissions across the state did not look like their respective jurisdictions. The Voting Rights Act changed all that and gave minority communities the opportunity to really have a voice. That is gone. But the significance is this. I hear all of the time, Chad, well, my vote really doesn't count in Alabama.
Yeah.
It's just not going to matter in Alabama. And to some extent, the way that Republicans took control and gerrymandered and did things, to some extent, I can understand that. But I want people to understand but then 1965, 61 years ago, when the Voting Rights Act was passed, that's the key date. Because if you are 61 years old or younger, you have never lived in a United States that consciously denied people the right to vote. You've never lived in a United States that so marginalized communities, you had to get somebody to go to court to protect your right to vote. You've not lived in that era like that. You've not lived at a time when you were so marginalized, that you did not have a voice. You always had that ability in that 61 years to gain that voice through litigation or whatever. It's only if you are age 62 and older that you lived in a Jim Crow era where you might have tried to register to go to the polls and just got flat out turned away by a white supremacist sheriff,
Yeah.
or you were asked to take a poll, a literacy test. How many soap bubbles are in a bar of soap? How many jelly beans are in a jar? Those kind of things. And so when you lived in an era when the vote was there for you, it's sometimes easy to take things like that for granted. That vote's not there. That voice is not there with the Voting Rights Act anymore. And I think people are recognizing that. And they're seeing that that right is sacred. And how dare they take away that vote? And it's not just Black Alabamians, it's others that don't want to go back, that don't
Yeah.
want to see us go back to the prior voting rights in Jim Crow. We've heard it before. We don't want to go back. We've made such progress. And so I think you're seeing a lot of people energized now to make sure that their voting rights are protected. Because remember, these gerrymandered districts, Chad, they're based on old data. And
Yeah.
they're based on the fact that somebody is taking their vote for granted. They're assuming because they voted one way, they're going to vote the same way in the future.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to flip the script on that. And we're going to make sure that we create new data for districts going forward.
I was in DC about a week and a half ago when the Supreme Court came down with their ruling and said, no, Alabama can use those racially gerrymandered maps that we originally said were unconstitutional years ago. I was in DC at the Supreme Court that night, shortly after they came down with that decision, and I can't even express the energy that was coming out of that building. Because to me, for the first time, having gone to DC my entire life, having lived there for a short stint, that area just it felt dirty. It didn't
Yeah.
feel like the Supreme Court that we knew. It felt weaponized. It felt like it was a political body, and
It felt
it was
desecrated. It
yeah,
felt desecrated, just like having maybe a UFC fight on the lawn of the White House,
exactly.
just desecrated.
In the midst of that desecration, and exactly that whole that what they call the claw,
Yeah.
ugly. Oh my God! But in the midst of that desecration, as governor, if elected, what would you be able to do to protect voting rights of all Alabamians? And also, I do want to ask, because years ago, I believe it was around 2010, we saw a lot of DMVs in rural areas close, so people couldn't go
Right.
get licenses. They don't have access to government offices to get the materials that they need in order to cast a ballot. So with all of that in mind, what would you be able to do as governor to protect people's voting rights and allow them to have access to the polls that's equal across the state to everyone?
It's a great question. People often forget that there are three constitutional offices that includes the governor, the state auditor, and the ag commissioner, commissioner of agriculture and industries. Those three individuals get to appoint the election board chairman in every county in the state. So if you put the right people into the election board and the registrar board, can go a long way in protecting the right to vote in those particular counties. We're going to make sure that everybody has access. Now, I cannot, as governor, legislate a Voting Rights Act, but I'm going to be a strong proponent of Alabama. I'm going to be on my soapbox about the state of Alabama enacting our own voting rights to make sure that we have the ability to do early voting, to make sure that we don't have to jump through so many hoops with so many affidavits just to vote an absentee ballot. It doesn't matter about mail-in voting. I think that is something that we can do and there's no fraud. But I'm really more interested in early voting and letting people vote according to their schedules, not a schedule, Chad, that was first brought up in the 1700s to allow farmers to come into town to buy their supplies and vote while they were there. That's
Yep.
what this was all about. We're a different world now. And so people should be able to vote on their own time, given a very limited amount of time. I don't think we should have early voting that goes on for 2 months, but I think a 2 or 3 week window where people can vote at their convenience rather than the state's convenience would help bring people to the polls. We still have one of the lower turnouts of any state in the country. It's usually in the bottom third, I think,
Yeah.
although we register a lot of folks. But if we were to do that, I think we would get more participation. And when you get more participation, you have more democratic values and more
Yes.
democracy in front of you. So those are the kind of things that we want to do. And I will tell you this, we will be very vigilant in making sure that no one is intimidated at the polls, that everybody has the right to cast that ballot, and we will do the things necessary to make sure that people are encouraged to vote.
Absolutely. Look, I am tired of fighting people online about the difference between early voting and absentee voting. They're not the same. When you get an
That's right.
absentee ballot, you have to check boxes that say I'm either traveling for work or I won't be able to make it to the polls and it's like you're signing an oath. You can be sued
You are
if you're
signing
caught
an oath,
lying.
as a matter of
Yeah.
fact. You are signing an oath
S-
to tell the truth. Plus, remember this, Chad, or you can't just walk up to the polls and vote.
Yeah.
Even if you go to the courthouse, you've got to fill out an application first. And
Yep.
then you send it in if you want to do that. And then they send you the ballot. It is a very cumbersome process that discourages people from doing it, especially when you've also got to make a copy of your ID.
Yeah.
I'm not like a lot of folks that are just so crazy about voter ID. We've adapted to that. But a lot of people don't have photocopiers,
Yeah.
that they can do something like that. So early voting, so you can just walk up, show your ID, and vote like you would on election day, is the way to encourage people
Yeah.
to get out and vote and get those numbers up.
Back in January, when you were on the podcast, we talked about Medicaid expansion, specifically
Mhm.
through the lens of rural hospitals closing across to Alabama. And in some places, you have people where if you have a heart attack, it was a treatable, it was a treatable thing. But now there are some places in Alabama where you can't make it to a hospital fast enough
Right.
if you do have a heart attack. We're going backwards in that sense. And we talked about Medicaid expansion and how there's money sitting in Montgomery that they're just not using. Well, now we're looking at the threat of Jackson Hospital in Montgomery, Alabama closing at
Yeah.
some point within the next 10 days. A lot of people are saying it's due to insurance issues. But I wanted to ask you, if Medicaid was expanded, would the situation be different for Jackson Hospital right now in Montgomery?
I think it would be different. I'm not sure, because I do think that there are some issues with Blue Cross and an insurance companies, but I think it would be different, and it would at least give some life support to help it hang on to work out those other differences. Remember, when you have that steady Medicaid income with increased Medicaid funding, you have the stability that you can work through other issues that might come up. And that's what I think is the most important thing about Jackson, because that hospital is not in a rural area. It
Yeah.
is in Montgomery, but it also serves a very needy, low income population in Montgomery. So there's so much I think that could come positive from Medicaid expansion. And I truly believe that if I'm elected and when I get elected, we will expand the eligibility, and then we'll find a way. Because I think from everything I've heard over the last few years, there are enough Republicans in the state legislature who would really like to do this, but they're just not strong enough to do it politically and to go against the grain of
Mm.
what the Republican Party's official position is. But businesses want it, local leaders want it, the hospital association wants it. It
Yeah.
is time that we do that.
There is absolutely a need for it, and I talked about it on my social media, and there were thousands of comments from people in the Central Alabama area who were very concerned. You had people who were having to float the idea of moving to a city that has the specialized care that they
Right.
were receiving at Jackson that they no longer have access to. You have, I believe, over 71,000 patients that they see, over 1,700 employees, if I'm not mistaken. It would be horrendous the impact on the local community in Alabama if that hospital closed. So I appreciate you talking about Medicaid expansion and how that could help Alabamians because healthcare is an
And
issue.
it's huge. And Chad, let me say this too: for anybody that ever goes to a doctor or a hospital in Birmingham or in Mobile or in Huntsville, look around at the out of county cars that are
Mm,
parked in the parking lot for doctors. And some of it is specialists for sure, because that's
yeah,
where the some of the really top docs and specialists are. So some of that is that, but not all. There's so many people that have to drive into Birmingham, drive into Huntsville, or even to like Gadsden or another city where they are from another county for routine care. And that is, that's just not sustainable for communities that where people have to drive 2 or 3 counties over 45 minutes to an hour just for routine care.
yeah,
And heaven forbid they have an emergency, because it will take that long for emergency care to get to them
yep.
somehow. So we've really got to do a better job, and we do a better job, Chad, by getting somebody in that governor's office who cares about the health care of the citizens and not just the damn politics.
Yeah, I was so when I was in DC, and I'll move on to the next topic in a minute. But when I was in DC, I was at the Trending Up conference, and it was a bunch of influencers using their platforms for good. And one of our guest speakers was Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey.
Yeah.
And one thing that she was speaking about was how they are number one for life expectancy in the country, and how they invest in their healthcare infrastructure, how they invest in their hospitals and their doctors, and they incentivize them to come to their state, and as a result, they have the best life expectancy in the country. So, and when you
And
look out,
interesting, Chad, you know who really helped promote that when he was governor is Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney put forth a health care package that was passed that was very similar to the Affordable Care Act that President Obama did.
I I did not know that. I appreciate you giving that context because in the context of Alabama, who we have one of the worst life expectancies in the country, one of the
Right.
lowest, and we're supposed to be this pro-life state, but yet when you go to the blue state of Massachusetts, who now knowing Mitt Romney is the one that really pushed that through, uh, it's ironic that they have the best quality of life. Um, so I just wanted to point that out for the audience that when this party who is had a super majority control over our state legislature for so many years, we have one of the worst life expectancies in the
Yep.
country, and we can do
Yep.
better.
We can do better. And we will do better, Chad. We
We
will do
will.
better.
We will when you get in that governor's mansion. Um, well, another thing that I keep hearing from my audience, Doug, is data centers.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that people in Alabama are looking for someone to lead on this issue.
Yeah.
From Pritchard to Lowndes County, you have Montgomery and Bessemer. There are so many people who feel like their voices are falling onto deaf ears. There is not enough regulation in this state right now to control the impacts of what we know data centers will do to our community, to our environment, um, to our health, to our quality of life. Where do you fall on the data center debate? Do you believe in a moratorium on data centers being built until we can regulate it more?
Yeah,
Wh-
look, it'd be great to be able to do that. I'm not. I think it's very difficult for the state of Alabama to do that right now without a constitutional amendment, which would take a lot to get through. But I do think there are things that the state could do to work with local folks. I mean, we can. This they passed a bill this time that removed some of the tax abatements that these data centers would get and shorten them and make them and require those data centers to do more to meet certain local zoning regulations. But the fact is, we need to work more to put more guardrails on them. One of the real problems, Chad, with the data center thing is that we almost seem to be a dumping ground because
Yes.
people will come and we give all these tax incentives and tax abatements when I don't think that there will be that much to gain. I mean, like the legislation that got passed was to give some tax abatements you know, if it costs more than $400,000 to build and you're going to employ more than 20 people, well, that's a windfall, okay, for big tech, very rich companies to come in there and do whatever the heck they're going to do. So I think there's a couple of things that we need to do, and I think the state can do it, but we also need to have some best practices for these local officials and give these local officials some cover to make sure that they do things. And one of them is to get more local input from the communities to make sure that people understand and know what is being planned and how and what, and have some community hearings ahead of time. So much of these things are coming up under the cover of darkness, and
Yeah.
people don't know what they don't know. And then when they do know, it scares them to death, and it should. I think technology is changing, and some of these data centers are going to be a lot more eco-friendly than the ones that have gone up in the past. But we don't know that on the front end. We don't know what is being planned. All that we know is somebody's done something and you're starting to break ground. So yes, I am for putting the brakes on. I am for putting guardrails up. I am for making sure that they are doing things to where they're generating their own electricity. They're doing things to protect their water sources, and the environment around the massive construction is being adequately protected, and communities have a say so in what's going on. This is going to be a work in progress. Obviously, the legislature is out of session. You got a new administration coming in. So right now we've got to depend on local communities to do the right thing, to stand up and put some guardrails and say, hold on a minute. We're not going to say no, but we want to get the community engaged in this. And I'm going to tell you, I've been thinking about this a little bit too. One thing that I'd like to see, and I hadn't really studied this as much, but
Sure.
at one point, there was a big, massive cleanup, environmental cleanup in the Anniston area because the old Monsanto plant had put so many PCBs into the water and into the ground. And people used to come get all of this topsoil that was PCB laden, and they would use it for their lawns. They didn't know better. And so there were the PCBs all throughout Anniston, and there was a cleanup process. And I was appointed by the U.S. District Court here in Birmingham to be one of the two special masters to help oversee that. And one of the things as part of that consent decree that Solutia Monsanto had to do was to fund a community advisory group that would meet every month or as needed. And they would have some funds to have independent folks look at what was going on, look at the cleanup, look at the environmental situation of what was happening. And it seems to me that all of these folks that are building these big data centers, they got a lot of money. They can put some money back in that community, not just to buy support, but to give folks the opportunity to have a community advisory group that can hire some
Yeah.
folks independently to look. That's not really been talked about very much, but I think it needs to be considered.
It absolutely needs to be considered. And one thing that I would appreciate your take on, because I'm at a loss on what accountability looks like for our local communities where you have hundreds of thousands of citizens coming out to make their voices heard on these meetings that are planned last minute, and you have these local governments who are going above their citizens' heads despite there being hundreds of people who are speaking in opposition to what they're doing. So, just real quickly, like how can we as voters hold our local communities accountable if there is a change and well, there will be within a change of administration, the legislature is not in session, and so it really does fall on the people to hold our local elected officials accountable. What does that look like at this moment?
I think that people need to continue to do what they're doing, and that is number one, showing up and having their voices heard. Understanding that if something is already in the works, it's already gone, you're probably a little bit too late to the party.
Yeah.
But then you can hold those elected officials if you are upset, if it is not working out according to the way that folks thought it has been represented to them. Hold them accountable when there is an election in that community, making sure that people know and understand. But ask that. I think folks can ask the city council. We've got things that are in the works and being planned, showing up and making sure that elected officials know that they need to engage the public on the front end and give their adequate time for the public to know and understand and ask questions and do some work on their own. That's important for those that are being planned and that are certainly in construction. I would ask for a community advisory group. I would ask that the city council or county commission require that company to fund a community advisory group. And then on the ones that are not there right now, people need to be saying, to their elected officials, you are the elected officials. You are our representative. It should not be up to us to be the guardians here. We expect you to give us notice. We expect you to hold public hearings, not sign non-disclosure agreements where you go behind closed doors. We expect you to do that. If you don't do that, you do so at your peril for the next election.
Yeah.
I think people have that power. They have the power of the vote. They have the power of their voice.
A big portion of the data center conversation that I'm seeing revolves around the youth vote. And I know we talked about it in January. I've gone to your office here in Birmingham a few times, and it's been really energizing seeing so many young people working on your campaign and seeing them on social media. I just want to ask, what is your campaign doing differently than what you see other campaigns doing to really motivate and activate the youth in Alabama to make sure that they show up to the polls?
We're engaging, number one. You attract youth voters, not with me, but you attract youth voters with the issues that they care about, and you attract youth voters with other youth voters so that they can talk. They talk to a different language. We're also doing, things like coming on the He's Not Wrong podcast because you've got a good youth following. We're doing the things and getting out there to let folks know that we are open and we are listening. We believe, and I believe, and I've always believed, Chad, that our youth vote and our youth in this state are the most critical piece of the electorate. I've been around this place for a while. I've done a lot in my life. I've been really blessed. And if I left the scene today and just retired, I would feel good about the things that I was able to do for the people of Alabama. But I'm not doing this for me. And that's the difference, I think, with me and Tommy Tuberville.
Yep.
I think it's the difference with our whole ticket and the Republican ticket. I'm doing this because I got grandkids in this state. I'm doing because I've got friends like you. I'm doing it because there are so many people in this state that I love this state. I care so much and I care deeply about this state. And I want to leave it to that next generation and the next. And I want to do the things necessary to put in place where they can build the future for this state. And I think that's coming across. That's why you see so many young folks. And so we're going to be using those folks to organize around campuses and in both college campuses, junior college campuses, trade schools, you name it. We're going to be organizing the youth a good bit.
This is also a good opportunity to say you're not a career politician. It is something that I've seen online. I think people think you're elected once and it just makes you a career politician. You served in the United States Senate for what, like barely 3 years? You've been an attorney your entire life. Like you're not an elected or you're not a career politician. And it is such an important juxtaposition to make against other people.
It is, and but the real difference is they're using the wrong term because there are career public servants who I would put so much confidence in. But that's the difference between a public servant and a politician. I believe that my career has been in public service.
Yes.
Whether it was my first year working for Senator Heflin as a 25-year-old kid on the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, or then as an assistant United States attorney, a federal prosecutor here for 4 years, later on as the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, and then as the United States Senator and hopefully governor. I believe in public service. This is not it is not my job. It is the people's job. And you work for the people that elect you. This is not an ego trip to where it is just something that I feel like I'm just destined to do. And
Yeah.
I think too many people that are holding public office, whether it's in politics or whatever, see this as their power source.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's the people's power, and you are a public servant. And I truly do believe that, Chad. I know I'll get criticized as a politician because to be a public servant, you've got to get involved in politics.
Yeah.
But I think if you look at my history, it has really been of service and not politics.
Absolutely. And I love sharing your history with people when I see criticisms online. That is what I go to. I go to your record, and oftentimes people are like, "Oh, I should probably look that up." I'm like, "Yeah, let's start. Let's normalize doing research before we press submit on a comment."
Right.
But speaking of comments, I do have a few listener questions from the audience, and some of their names, I'm not gonna lie, their little handles on social media are really too weird to read. So I don't have a name
Okay.
for
No
you.
worries.
But the first one comes from someone who would love to know what Doug plans to do to ensure equal rights are maintained for Alabamians of all races, religions, sexual orientations, and how we can allow women to have the freedom of choice again.
Yeah, look, that's a pretty there's a lot to unpack in that
Yeah.
question. But I think that the main thing is to have that bully pulpit, to be able to be an advocate. We were down, Louise and I this past weekend. We were at the Pride Parade. Then we went to Pride Fest yesterday. We're there to advocate for those rights, and I think that advocacy from the governor's office is really strong. It's the same advocacy that I did have when I was in the United States Senate, whether it is for equal pay for women, whether it's for maternal health, whether it was to make sure that the gay community is not discriminated against in any way, whether it is minority communities. I have been that voice, and I'm going to continue to be that voice. Again, the governor can't legislate, but the governor can set an example. The governor can talk about the things and advocate for things to try to work with the legislature. And the governor can build an administration that looks like Alabama. Remember, Chad, one of the things that we have talked about, you and I have talked about this on the other broadcast. You have heard me say it. As opposed to the division and the hate that we see coming from the other side, we want to build Alabama as a house with a crowded table, where there's a place by the fire for everyone. And everyone's always a little broken. We all have our problems and our issues, but we all belong and we all have a voice. That's the vision for governing. And if you've got that vision for governing, it's that vision by setting the example and to work with the legislature to ensure those protections.
This next question comes to you from one of my friends, actually. Her name's Amanda from Montgomery, Alabama. I grew up with her. And she wants to know what the most important thing the average voter can do to help your campaign.
That's a very good question, Amanda. It's a really good, because number one, you can volunteer. You can go on dougjones.com. You can volunteer. We've got all manner of opportunities, and those are going to expand. I mean, everything from phone calling to postcard writing to knocking on doors and in canvassing, but also just within having your own dialogues, your own meetups, referring people to us, correcting people when they hear misinformation about my record and about me and what I stand for and what I believe in. I think that having those conversations, being part of the campaign, if you want to, we're going to have this. There's all kind of QR codes out there that you can donate, volunteer, and we're going to probably put one on soon that just simply says a QR code that says I'm voting for Doug, and have your voice heard that way. But what I would really encourage is to help us get our message out on social media, to spread that word, and to correct the misinformation that is out there already and is going to get worse. We know that we're going to get hit with so much just garbage. It's going to be stunning. So I appreciate that, Amanda, but you've got a network. You've got a network, and we all have our own little network. And if we can just all get our network to understand and understand the importance of the election coming forward, and then looking at my record, we're going to do just fine.
You know, one thing I do want to say, this is the name of the episode, but a good conversation starter um, is, and I've been saying this, is I prefer my men from Alabama. And so that I think it's a good conversation starter. It grabs
It is.
attention. I think we can't underscore the as you said, we can't underscore the power of uh conversation enough right now. I think really right now, the most impactful thing that we can be doing is talking and conversing. And it's one of my favorite things to do is correcting records and correcting misinformation. So um, I appreciate how you answered that. Thank you. And Doug, we've made it to your final and favorite question. We want to know what it is that you're not wrong about for the second time.
You know, Chad, I was thinking about that. And I think the last time when you asked me that question on this podcast, and I talked about what I believed that the folks in Alabama kind of wanted, and they wanted some change. They wanted
Mm.
somebody who was going to listen to them, that was going to work for them. They wanted somebody who was going to build that house with a crowded table. I I know that this sounds funny, but I don't think I was wrong about that. And I think I was not wrong about that. And I think that the votes that I got, that the number of people that came and voted for change in the primary on May 19th demonstrates that. And I am so grateful for that. I am personally grateful, but I am also hopeful that that is going to carry forward because, I didn't think I was wrong about that at the time. Now I know I wasn't. And that's a good thing. And that's a good thing. So the next time you have me, I'll have a different answer. We'll be able to come up with something different. But to be able to say at the early campaign that I was not wrong about what I thought Alabama wants, and now to say I wasn't wrong when I said that, I think is really important for the future here.
I love it. You have the data to back up what you said in January, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate you. I am so grateful and thankful for what you're doing, for the fight that you're putting up. Whatever we can do to help you. I know I promised this to you in January, and I hope you know that I mean it when I say this space is yours. I will do whatever it takes to help you and your campaign out. We are so close, honestly, to your headquarters. I just doxed myself, but whatever y'all need, we are here. I appreciate you, and I know the audience is going to appreciate this conversation. We did go over our allotted time, but I know that the audience for seriously is going to be so grateful for the answers that you gave and for sharing a bit of yourself with them.
Well, thanks for having me again, and we'll do it again before November, maybe a couple of times.
I look anytime. You're always welcome.
All right, buddy. Thanks.